Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Hope you all are doing good. European Classical Literature, the second co-paper. Today, I'm going to give you the introduction of European Classical Literature. But before that, let me give you a brief idea about what is classical literature. What is a classic? A classic is a work of high authority. It could mean a literary work belonging to ancient Greece or Rome, or a writer or her work that is of such high merit that it is acknowledged as excellent. Classicism refers to any work of art pertaining to ancient Greece or Rome. The influence of classicism was strongest in France in the 17th and 18th centuries, though its influence was felt strongly in England at that time. Apart from classicism, another literary tradition, the neoclassical period, extending roughly between 1660 to 1780, gained prominence in England. Dryden, Swift, Addison, Steele, and Pope were some of the exponents of this tradition. The writers of this tradition upheld the ancient classical authors and thought of literature as an art to be perfected through prolonged study. They emerged as highly skilled craftsmen who respected the rules of their art. They believed that the function of art was to instruct and please, and held reason and judgment in high regard. They believed in technical correctness and had a definite vision of man and mankind. They upheld the preserving of order, balance, and correctness, and also imitated the works of classical writers, particularly those belonging to the Latin tradition. European classical literature. This literature has been divided into various periods: the Archaic period, Classical period, Hellenistic period, and Roman period. The Archaic period, it includes Homer. You have Homer's Iliad Universalis, and many other writers like Solon, Hesiod. Then classical literature, it includes the Sophocles, and you have Sophocles in your syllabus, the Oedipus Rex. And then there is Aristophanes, Plato, Aristotle. Then the third period is Hellenistic period. That is, it includes like Archimedes, Theophrastus, Plautus, and you have Plautus as the pot of gold in your syllabus. Then there is Roman period. In Roman period there is Horace, Ovid, Roman annexation of Egypt, and Juvenal. You have Ovid's Metamorphoses. Two books are in your syllabus, that is book 3 and book 6. Ovid's Metamorphoses. Greek and Roman mythology is generally opposed to show us the way the human race thought and felt untold ages ago. Through it, according to this view, we can retrace the path from civilized people who live so far from nature to those people who lived in close companionship with nature. And the real interest of the myths is that they lead one back to the time when the world was young and people had connection with the earth, with trees, the seas, the flowers, and the hills. The study of ancient Greek literature implies a study of literature written in Greek language in the pre-Christian period by non-Christians in the first 6 centuries of the Christian era. Though writing was used in Greece during the Bronze Age, but the written material surviving from that period appears to be less in the form of literature and more in the form of administrative records. Around 700 BC, the Greeks used a variety of writing materials and techniques for different purposes. But literary works were written in ink, on papyrus, a fibrous material manufactured in sheets from an Egyptian plant and made into long rolls by sticking the sheets together at the edge. However, when Greeks entered their literature, they did so through the medium of listening to the spoken words. Thus, speech is given the special place in the communicative or performing arts. Their minds carried with them a mythical consciousness which they related to their social reality. Now let's have a look on the historical, the geographic space. The Greeks were not a nation governed from a capital city, but scattering of 1,000 city-states on the Greek mainland, the Aegean islands, and part of coastline of Turkey, the Black Sea, Libya, Sicily, and southern Italy. These states were very small in population and territory, but each asserted its own sovereign status, and many were in constant warfare with one another. They were united only by speaking dialects of the same language, by the access to a common literature and culture which that language provided, by participation in shared religious cults and festivals, and by the freedom of movement which their artists and writers enjoyed. In the classical period, tragedy was a peculiarly Athenian development and increasingly admired as a supreme poetic form. This contributed towards turning Athens into the cultural center of the Greek world. But a more important consideration was the power and wealth which Athens acquired through its role in the defeat of Persia and the imperial control which exercised over its allies throughout the Aegean. Athens lost this great power when it suffered defeat by Sparta at the end of the 5th century. But no political defeat or humiliation could slow down the increasing domination of its culture and literature. Documented literary histories show that the Athenians brought prose literature to maturity. Plato in philosophy, Demosthenes in oratory, Attic, the dialect of Athens, became the basis of literary and official Greek thereafter and gave rise in its turn the dialects of stylistic registers for medieval and modern Greek. The archaic and classical periods together are the most creative and inventive period of Greek literature. During a period when comedy was alive with experimentation and prose literature was attaining an unsurpassed power and elegance, the Athenians were consciously attempting to revive 5th century tragedies at the dramatic festivals in preference to the work of new playwrights. Perhaps the defeat in the war against Sparta made them realize that not only the military achievements of the 5th century but the various characteristic artistic achievements were beyond emulation and needed to be preserved. The city of Dionysia hosted the greatest of dramatic festivals, the occasion on which subject allies would come annually to pay tribute and be spectators to theatrical performances and poetic rendering of familiar legends and myths. In the second half of the 14th century, not only Athens but the 4th century, not only Athens but the other major cities of Greece and Aegean suffered irreversible injury when the kingdom of Macedonia under Philip II and his son Alexander the Great gained dominance. Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire spread the Greek language and culture everywhere in the Near East, but the days of the sovereignty state were over. In the course of time, all the Greek speaking areas of the Mediterranean came gradually one after the other under the rule of Rome. If Greek literature first appears in the 8th century BC, the reason is simply that when the Greeks learned alphabetic writing from the Phoenicians, they had not by any means been without literature during the preceding centuries of illiteracy. All people at all times have poetry, song, and storytelling. Whether or not they have writing, and it may safely be asserted on more than one ground that the earliest Greek poetry we have is a mature of many hundred of years evolution. We must not think of Greek literature as beginning in the 8th century but as coming into view. Now, retrieving ancient literature. Of all that the Greek wrote, there is not more than a fraction in stock. We know the names of hundreds of Greek historians. We have the work of only three of them from the classical period, and a handful from later times. It is possible to assume that well over 2000 plays were staged at Athens between 500 and 200 BC, but no more than 56 are available for the purpose of reading and performance. This loss may be attributed to the gradual decline in interest in pagan literature with the advent of Christianity, which diverted intellectual energy into other channels. However, there was a parallel movement due to the enthusiasm of a new churchman at Byzantium in the 9th century AD, who devoted themselves to retrieving and copying manuscripts of pagan works which survived in a scattered way from earlier times. From then onward, the study of ancient Greek literature took its place in Byzantine education and culture. Western European, particularly Italian, interest in it was awakened in the late Middle Ages, and together with the invention of printing ensured it a place in most educational systems. Many surviving works written in Hellenistic times gave detailed quotations and in passing references to earlier work, which are now lost, indicating that through anthologies, lexicons, grammatical and metrical treatises, commentaries, and literary or philosophical essays, there is information about scores of poems, plays, and books through quotations and excerpts for every one that we can read in its entirely. It seems that the lost authors about whom we know something far exceed in number those of whom we possess any complete work. Practically, all the literature which was rescued from the oblivion in the early Middle Ages owed its survival to a process of selection. It represents what was most admired and most often read and studied in the last centuries of Roman Empire. In ancient and medieval times, every copy of a text had to be made by a hand yielding pen from another, and omissions, insertions were part of the continuous process of copying texts. The reader of Greek literature in translation would encounter a number of translations but can be reassured the different translators are not constantly guessing or disagreeing about what the author meant to say. There is no sign that the Greeks thought that any art had an obligation to be charged with despair or to depict squalor because the society for which it was created was afflicted by despair or beset by squalor. They are more likely to have concurred with the view that it is business of the arts to compensate for life by creating what life generally fails to create. People of extraordinary beauty and courage, movements divested of all triviality. A modern painter said, I paint like a barbarian in a barbarous age. a Greek might have retorted, if your age is barbarous, that is the strongest possible reason for not painting like a barbarian. It was all for today. In the next lecture, which I'm going to upload soon, we will learn about the various Greek writers like Plato, Aristotle, Longinus, and the various other Roman writers. Till then, Allah Hafiz, take care, and don't forget to subscribe my channel.